and everybody's probably trying to decide between the Egg McMuffin or the breakfast burrito right now. But overall, we're pretty excited to be talking to you guys. This is our second time speaking at FinCon. This is our third FinCon that we've actually visited. If you don't know, my name's Brian Preston. This is my co-host, Mr. Bo Hanson. I do have a few questions for you guys before we kind of jump into what we're going to be talking about today. How many people are financial advisors in the audience? If you could just raise your hand. So a good number of you. And then another question, how many of you guys have actually heard of the Money Guy Show? Any of y'all actually listen to the show? Y'all have no idea how much that makes my heart just open up and smile, because y'all know, as a content creator, you create content, but you really don't know. You get the numbers and you see somebody's listening, but you don't know who those people are. And I will tell you, the first few years, as you'll see when we get through the slides, those emails I got from listeners and stuff is what kept this thing going and turned it into something, because there was nothing coming in other than the personal fulfillment of having our audience connecting with us. So thank you for those that listen to us. What we're going to be talking about today is that even though this is focused for financial advisors, I think it could work with just content creators in general, and the fact that there is so much pressure as a content creator and a thought leader in the digital world that we're in, that you're just trying to figure out, how do you find your voice? How do you make this thing work to where you stand out in the noisy world we live in? Because it's getting to be where there's a lot of bloggers, there's a lot of podcasters, and you're drowning in all this stuff out there. So how do you make yourself stand out? So and that's what I was telling a few of you before we even started clicking through the slides, is that this thing started out as a passion project, and by accident, I'm the Mr. Magoo of marketing. I realized that this thing could actually generate business, but we still kept doing business as usual, keeping it just on the passion side of things and letting that run the course. But we've realized now that it makes much more sense to be deliberate and run this more focused. I don't want to say like a business, but we definitely brought in some players to help us, some professionals and some others. And I want to tell you, if you are going to go to that next level, what you can expect from the professionals, what you need to expect from yourself, as well as also what you can do to try to keep your message fine-tuned and focused. So we'll kind of jump into this thing. And what's cool is we figured out we could both have clickers. So we're going to be dueling clickers. So if there's any mistakes or we bang up on each other, just know that's kind of our goofiness, as you get the thunder and lightning from us as we're going through this thing together. So first, because most of you are financial advisors, I want to go over a few things. And some of this was discovered completely organically, and I was shocked, and it's going to be one of those things, hopefully I'm the only one that is showing you this, because I don't want everybody else to realize this, because it's kind of embarrassing for us. But how does the public view financial advisors? I can tell you personally, when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I'm a podcaster. I don't even tell them a financial advisor anymore, because we got Uncle Bernie. I mean, he's the same guy that was using his dot matrix printer to not only print checks, but he was also using it to print account statements and everything else that his clients might need, and just make the checks payable to Uncle Bernie and he'll take care of it for you. That obviously did not turn out very well. We also, Alan Moore, we're being sponsored by XY Planning. I thought it was this is something I just kept in my back pocket when I saw Alan post this. He said, I just heard someone describe financial planning as male, pale, and stale. I mean, it's kind of true. I mean, we were speaking at a Fidelity conference just last week, and that is exactly, you kind of look at the successful firms out there, and unfortunately that seems to be the truth right now. So we have an issue with that in our industry as well. And then look at this. This truly is just a screenshot. I didn't make this up. There's no photoshopping to this whatsoever. As I was preparing this is what I'm telling you, this is proprietary, that I think I'm the first one to figure this out, or hopefully I am, because we don't want the public to realize this. Just go on Google. You know how it fills in? This is how we come up with good podcast titles, good blog titles, is we go on all-knowing Google and ask them what we should name stuff. And all you do is you just start typing what you're thinking about, and it will tell you what most people are searching for. So when you do, financial advisors are worthless, crooks, bad for your wealth, salesmen. That's why I tell everybody I'm a podcaster, because this is embarrassing. That's not photoshopped. I'm telling you, that is crazy that that's really what Google thinks of us. And that's what all-knowing Google is telling everybody about us too. And so we have this public perception problem, but then you take into account traditional marketing. I mean, when I first started doing this, I've been doing this since the 90s, and I came out, when everybody was making 100% every 2 years, it seemed like, and all you had to do was go buy they weren't CD-ROMs, you just go buy your list of phone numbers to start calling, you cold call, you do traditional marketing, you sponsor baseball teams in the community, you do all this traditional stuff, that just doesn't really work as much as it used to. I mean, we're very much in a digital world now, so you have to kind of change the way you've been doing business. And then we all know that this new fiduciary standard, if you want to work in anything in retirement, there's now this Department of Labor requirement that's kind of shaking up our industry a little bit. And then let's not forget, the robots are coming to kill us all. Because unless you're living under a rock, they tell us every time you open up your financial planning magazine or anything, they talk about how robo-advisors are coming. I think it's a bunch of malarkey. All they're doing is commoditizing the investment side of things, but still, if you are doing what you're supposed to on the advisor side, it's kind of hard for a robot to replace you. They're only doing step 3 out of the 4 steps of financial planning. So I don't worry about Skynet taking over as much as the publications talk about.
So what we want to kind of chat with you about is we obviously have this perception problem out there in the public. And so it becomes necessary to either reinvent yourself or find a way to make your voice stand out. So we wanted to talk about how you do that effectively and what are some of the pitfalls you can run into. And so the first question is, why is it necessary to reinvent yourself? And that's because sometimes the first version of ourselves isn't quite as good as the final version of ourselves, right? I don't think a lot of people miss JT 1.0. I think most people are pretty excited about JT 2.0. So this is what it looks like when reinventing yourself, rebranding, goes very, very well. Sometimes, though, it doesn't quite go as well. Y'all probably all know who this guy is, right? Garth Brooks. He wanted to sort of reinvent himself, and this is what he came back as, right? Who knows this story? Do you guys know who Chris Gaines is, right? Yeah, so
doesn't he look like Zoolander, though?
That's like Ben
He looks like Ben
right?
Stiller sitting up there.
So Garth decided he wanted to break this sort of doing
wanted to get into pop.
country music. He wanted to go do this pop thing, and this is what he did. Awful, horrible flop, right? So this is what happens when rebranding and reinventing yourself goes very poorly.
Google Chris Gaines if you don't believe us. That really is what he tried to create an alter ego.
And then there are other people who it works well for, right? So we remembered 1998 Brittany, and now we have 2016 Brittany, and it doesn't look like things went so bad. But every now and then when we rebrand and we reinvent ourselves, we kind of get lost along the way, right? So what we're hoping we can do is kind of walk you through how you can prevent becoming lost along the way or having a time where you find yourself finding your voice or creating a voice that maybe doesn't accurately reflect who you are.
So you guys, you're probably wondering, fortunately, a number of you guys have listened to our podcast, so you know who we are. But the thing I think that makes us unique is that we are kind of a nimble firm. I used to say we're a small firm, but we're getting decent enough size on us now that we're not necessarily a small firm anymore. But I still think we're nimble in the fact that we still are trying to attack and find opportunities out there in the marketplace that we're trying to share with you guys today too. And I will tell you what drives us, the purpose behind us in general, is I think we're very well-intentioned. I think that's what combines all of us. Most people who are out there creating content, you are very well-intentioned. You feel like you're making your mark to make the world a little bit better place by sharing your information. And I think that well-intentioned stuff does pay off if you can find your voice and make it work for you. But I also think we have good instincts. I mean, whenever I read any of these things from Fidelity and other things talking about the new e-advisors, we're doing a lot of that stuff naturally, so I think it's good that if we can share with you. So we were here last year speaking at FinCon. It was our first time speaking at FinCon, and we did a presentation titled How Being a Nerd Led to a $40 Million Podcast. Now, I promise you, when we did this presentation last year, Star Wars was much cooler before the movie came out. Now we've got saturation point, and we look like idiots with all the Star Wars stuff on there. But it was very timely last year, especially with the con. We were putting the con in FinCon, I felt like, with the presentation. But what I think is interesting, it was $40 million last year of assets under management that we picked up strictly from the podcast. Just 1 year later, that number is now over $60 million because, I mean, this thing is picking up. So that's why I tell you guys, there is gold in them there hills if you can figure out how to get your voice to work, because people are hungry to find relationships. It's exactly, you had asked me, Melissa, how do people find financial advisors and stuff? Word of mouth is one way, and that's the way it's traditionally worked, but here's a whole nother way that we've kind of figured out and put a voice to, and we're going to share with you some of our journey. But here's what we've quietly figured out, and that's the e-advisor stuff that you hear Fidelity do all kind of white papers on and things that you could be doing. You can go download that out there through a simple little Google search. but how we're standing out in a noisy environment, and then we're also, this is the key thing, we're perceived as experts. We're perceived as experts without, we are experts now. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but when we started out, I don't know that our credentials led us to be experts, but we sure were presenting ourselves that way. So here's where the firm is, and people are always surprised that we really are this nerdy. That's why I saw another CPA in the crowd, and I got excited because I really do love the numbers. And since I started the firm, we have been tracking how we get clients. We track performance. We track all kind of analytics. So this is the evolution of us adding clients. And you can see back when we were down here in the early years, I'll tell you, just to go ahead and give you the cliff notes. This is podcasting. This is our portion of our client base that has come from the podcast. This is coming from professional referrals, and this is friends and family, which is old tried and true friends and family. When you first go out, mama and daddy, and hopefully will invest with you. If they're not, if you can't get your parents to invest with you, you're probably not going to be a successful advisor. So you hit those early. But look at this. This is what I think is pretty cool. We were very much a traditional advisory firm. I started podcasting in 2006 as a passion project. I had my first iPod. I was excited about it. Just throwing my voice out there with messages. It was so funny. My wife even had to go to my friends and say, please don't make fun of him. He's doing this thing. Who knows if it works? Because it does seem kind of kooky if you look back in time, but it paid off for us. And I saw an opportunity that this thing was going to revolutionize technology and the way we all consume audiobooks as well as content. And the iPod really did change things, just like the iPhone did. And then we kept with it. And here's what was interesting. At the end of 2008, first of 2009, we had one or two people start reaching out to us and saying, hey, I kind of been listening to the podcast for a few years, like what you're saying. Can I work with you? And we were like, you want to work with us? Because this was a passion project. This was never to be a marketing tool. And so we kept doing it, and we started picking up more clients, as you can see, but we were not asking for anything. We weren't asking for business because I truly just wanted to share. I always wanted to be a school teacher. So this was my platform to educate. And then I had a friend who's a partner at a pretty large advisory firm in Atlanta, and we were at another one of those like Fidelity conferences, and he says, I know you're doing good with the podcast, but I'm surprised you don't get more business from it. And he goes, are you asking for business? And I said, no, because I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to sell something. I was so worried about it coming off as an infomercial. And so starting in 2014, we started at the beginning of our show and at the end of the show, we say, look, if you want to take your relationship to the next level, we are taking clients. That's it. Pretty much that's it. And we opened up the floodgates because you can see now we're picking up clients pretty regularly, and that's 90% of our business. So it is working. And I don't put this up there to brag about what we're doing. I'm just telling you, you do need to be deliberate. If you are a financial advisor who's giving content, don't be scared if you're really giving away something valuable to let people know you are open for business. Because I think I was so scared of coming off as an infomercial, but it doesn't come off as an infomercial if you just package it up as a message at the front and the end and then close it out.
Yeah, so what we all have to do, what you guys have to do is figure out sort of what is it that sets you apart? What is it that makes you unique? It was so funny when he had the thing on Google that said, financial advisors are. An expert was nowhere on there, right? And so for someone to hire you and want to work with you, you need to be perceived as an expert. Well, you can go meet with someone, try to sell them on that, or you can just give it away and let them arrive at that conclusion themselves. So you have to figure out sort of what sets you apart. So let's take just a little poll, right? So I want you to think about what you do, what your services are, how you offer, and we'll do this like show of hands. How many of you would say that what you do and the services you offer are unique? There's something unique about you. Okay, awesome. How many of you would classify yourselves as analytical? You're very, spreadsheet mind, you can think that way. Okay, number of hands, awesome. What about effective? When you work with someone, or even when you take on a task, you working that you're effective in how you arrive at solutions and implement those solutions. Okay, so still a lot of hands going up. What about responsible? You carry the weight of what you do very seriously, and you are responsible and even responsive. So a lot of hands. And then this last one, what about creative? Anyone in here consider themselves creative, right? All right, so the first question I asked is what sets you apart? And then I asked these words, and like half the room, 75% of the room, raised their hands, right? So we're all unique and responsible and effective and creative and analytical. Well, this is the sad truth, that these 5 overused words found on websites aren't even centralized to the financial advisory business. This spans across CPAs, accountants, you name it, this happens. So if the things that we think separate us really just kind of put us in line with everyone else, maybe we're not really recognizing what our true voice is, what that thing is that actually separates us, not from the competition, because none of us are competing with one another, but separates us inside the world in which we live and what we do. So we thought we'd talk about what are some effective voices out there? What are some things that we're thinking about and we're looking at that we can sort of benchmark both inside the financial planning world and outside? This is a really easy one, right? Who in here has heard of XY Planning Network?
Of course.
Everyone, right? So who in here knows what they do? Boom, it's something that separates them. Who else can name a competitor that does the same thing that XY Planning Network does? Nobody. Their voice is who they serve. If you're Gen X, Gen Y, financial advisor, that's where you need to go. So that's kind of what their voice is. How many of you guys have heard of Dollar Shave Club? Anybody, right? How many of y'all have seen that awesome video they did, right? So that video, y'all may not know this, they spent $4,000 to do that video. Over 2,500 of it was renting the warehouse they did it in. Wasn't even their spot, right? But here's what they said. We're no frills. We're not Gillette. We don't have 12 razor blades on our razors. We don't have some high-tech thing. We make razors. It'll shave your face. It's what we do, right? And so who they are the everyman's, or I don't even know if they have a ladies line.
No, they have a ladies line, I
They have
believe.
a ladies line
Yeah.
now. They are the every person's razor. So what sets them apart is they're not this big deal. They're these guys in a warehouse in bear costumes, right? What about this one? Apple, right? Their voice, what sets them apart from their competition is what they create. They create these devices that change our lives, right? Could you imagine operating your business today? And maybe you're not an Apple person, but I bet you probably have a smartphone or some sort of tablet. And these are kind of the innovators who sort of moved in that direction, right? So what they create is kind of that thing that separates them. And then Netflix is another easy example how they work, right? So you can just be laying in your bed, watch a movie, don't have to go to Blockbuster, don't have to go to the theater. That's the thing that separated them. And then the last case study is this guy, right? And it's why he does it, right? So he does Tesla, he does SpaceX, he does Solar City. The thing that his voice is the purpose behind what he's doing. All of these folks, none of these folks necessarily created something new, right? They didn't come up with some invention that changed things. I mean, there were telephones, there were computers, there was movies, but they created a way to express themselves that set them apart, that allowed their companies and their voices to be heard. So there are a few advisors out there, I think, that have also done this. We already mentioned XY. Most of us know this guy, right? Who knows who Michael Kitces is, right? Everyone, if you're even in social media.
Good for Michael.
So he's done a fantastic job establishing his voice as he is the weeds guy, right? If you want to go into the weeds, Michael Kitces has your answers. He's going to be able to parse through some stuff like nobody else. And that's kind of what he's done very well and how he has sort of differentiated himself. These other two, you guys may not know this. The first one is Vitaly Katznelson. He's a CFA.
Do y'all know him? Anybody know him?
Heard?
That's what y'all ought to write down both these names. These guys are thought leaders that they're doing some pretty cool stuff, even though they might not be as well known. Keep going.
So
I'm sorry.
he's an investment advisor, but he's specifically an investments guy. And this is what Forbes said about him. He's the next Benjamin Graham, right? So what he does really, really well is even if you're not investment minded, he can talk about the economy or companies or these macro events in just an amazing way that you're like, holy cow, I never thought of it that way. I never saw it that way. So it's fantastic.
And he's also an immigrant from Russia, so he has a pretty unique perspective on just things in general, being an immigrant from Russia.
His name is Vitaly Katznelson, and then his company's website is imausa.com. I subscribe to his newsletter. He sends it out, every month or so. It's a quick read. It's fantastic. It's very much like Warren Buffett letter to shareholders, only a little bit smaller, a little bit more direct. And then this last guy, David Holstrom. This is the spreadsheet guy. So if you're working through a client issue, you're like, man, I wish I had some way to do their pension thing, or I wish I could look at traditional versus Roth. If you go to his website, this dude just makes it all available. You can go download the spreadsheet, use it yourself, and it's out there. And he has an amazing newsletter too.
It reminds me of an artist. If y'all have ever had artists that were unsigned, and you just go to their website and you can just download their MP3s of all their albums, but as soon as they get signed, they take all that stuff down because then you have to buy it. This guy really does have all of his Excel spreadsheets out there if you're looking to benchmark or find cool things like, even mortgage analysis, rent versus mortgages. He's not that big, but I love reading how this guy writes. He definitely is thinking differently than a lot of people, and I think that that's a valuable thing, just to see a thought leader that's doing things a little bit differently.
And he writes for financial advisors, right? So he does this thing that's called Musings for Advisors, and just some things you ought to be thinking about. And it's just fantastically written. So all these guys are like brainiacs, right? And so I think that we would fall into this category, that we have also been effective in sort of getting our voice out there, but we're not the weeds guy, and we're not the Benjamin Graham guy, and we're not the spreadsheet guys. Our voice is kind of twofold. The first thing that we do well, I think, is the reason people dig into us, is that we take the complex and make it simple, right? So we can read something just really heady that Kitsis puts out there that's just like collegiate level stuff, and we can explain it to a third grade teacher, and it makes sense. You know, that's kind of what we are able to do. And then the second thing I think that's a little unique about us, and these guys kind of do as well, is we just give it away.
Yeah, and this is, I will tell you, this is one of those things I didn't realize. I told you we had good instincts. I think that the thing that I find so exciting is that why did I start doing content creation? Probably the same reason many of you are trying to do is you do want to have a positive impact. So we're in this new norm now where information kind of feels like it wants to be free. You know, it's that whole Google, how does Google make $1 gazillion a year? The more time that they keep you on the internet, the more money they make through advertisers. So they give you away tons of free stuff. They give you photo editing software. They give you Google Docs, Google Sheets. I mean, they want you on their websites and using their stuff because they figured out just give it away and keep you around. And it really is, as much as we pick on millennials, this is a new millennial mindset. I like to think that us Generation X guys helped out with that because we were the first ones ripping off on Napster, and I think it just became kind of addictive and it spread down. But we're not the first ones. I want to tell y'all, this is something that's been floating around for decades. It's just we're the first ones that it's actually seeing it come to light and actually be implemented, because I like to talk about 1984. Have y'all heard about the Hackers Conference and that whole discussion? You had Steve Brand, who, do y'all know what Steve Brand looks like? I didn't really know what he looked like. But you had the Hackers Conference, and they even wrote a book about it. It's very similar to FinCon, where you had a group of people who were considered thought leaders who all of a sudden started having meetings where they'd meet up so they could share ideas. That's very much what FinCon feels like to me. You know, this is our third year. It's so cool. It's not the sessions. I want you to feel like you're getting something out of this, but networking is also a big part of this thing because you're getting to talk to people who are also are thinking about things the same way you are. But Steve Brand and Steve Wozniak. There's Steve Brand, by the way, in his cool little vest there. I guess that was cool back in 1984. And then you got Wozniak with his nice stripes there, you know, the thinning stripes, I guess. But Wozniak, he's the Apple guy, of course, but here's what he said. On the one hand, information wants to be expensive because it's so valuable. The right information in the right place just changes your life. On the other hand, information wants to be free because the cost of getting it out there is getting lower and lower all the time. So Steve Brand was right on. I mean, now when you create content, whether it's a blog post, a podcast, or whatever else, once it's done, it's out there. You don't have to spend another penny creating that content or doing anything else with it. It's just out there for the masses. If 5 people want to read it, if 1 million people want to read it, there is no additional cost to you, so it wants to be free. I thought it was great what Wozniak had, because you never hear anybody, you always hear that quote, but you never hear Wozniak actually had a reply to him at the conference. He said, information should be free, but your time should not. And that's what I love. I think we found the perfect cross-section, is that we just give it away. I kid you not, if you go to the moneyguy.com, you can go talk about HSAs, you can talk about, we get into financial planning, retirement planning, and people, it was so funny at that Fidelity conference, I hear people still putting very territorial or protective, well, I don't want to share that. I mean, I need the clients to hire me first. And I think they're blowing it in the fact that clients want to know they're working with an expert, and this is a way for you to share that you've got the depth of knowledge. And it's true, our time is not free because we do very well picking up clients. We're not trying to just make ourselves martyrs. We are doing very well picking up clients, but we are just strictly giving it away. And I think it ties in nicely to that millennial mindset and everything else that's going on out there. And it's given us the perfect digital platform to create a classroom. This is a classroom that we now have thousands of people every other week show up and hear what we're giving our seminar on. And that is a powerful thing. If you think about the visual of having 15,000 people every 2 weeks come into your big auditorium like this and listen to what you say, that's fulfilling, and that's what you're doing. And you don't have to, and that's what we were talking at breakfast this morning. I think that we can give everything away because this is so new that there's plenty of opportunity for all of us. I mean, I don't have to worry about, do I need to put a fence around this yet, because there's not many people doing it. Less than 9% of advisors are even approaching digital content well.
But see, here's the problem, right? So, yes, ma'am.
If you go, there's a FPA, I don't have the actual link, but FPA, if you go out to their, was it the research institute, they have white papers and other things they're doing. But if you go look at thought leaders, they have a white paper, I think it was from 2015 or even maybe this year, 2016, on thought leaders in the digital age. And if you read through that, it was talking about 9% of advisors are actually getting clients or effectively using social media and digital content. And that's just such a low number. We're nowhere near saturation.
But we live in this world now where it is so easy to get information out there, right? So any Joe Schmo can put stuff out there. They can start a blog, start a podcast, right? So if you want to establish yourself as an expert, but there's a bunch of yahoos out there who can do the same thing that you're doing, how do you do that, right? So what are some things? And we found this quote, we thought it was so beautiful. We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. What I would argue is that the folks in this room, the folks at FinCon, we're the wisdom folks. We're the folks who actually kind of know what we're doing, what we're talking about. But there's a lot of other folks out there who have the same platform available as we do, and they're just kind of muddying the waters. So how do you do this, right? So how do you stand out? And what are the vital pieces you need to have?
Yeah, and this is kind of the key slide. And you're going to see these 4 concepts play out in the next few slides, because I believe in the whole Trinity thing, that most people can only retain 3 to 5 things. I mean, you're really not going to, if I could tell you what 3 to 4 things I want you to get from this presentation, the next 4 things we're going to show you are the things I need you to memorize. Because even if you're not a financial advisor, if you're just a social media content creator, I think if you put it through this funnel, it will help you fine-tune your voice. And so, but Rick Kaler came up with, he did a money column based upon, and there's the name of the organization. If you want to do a Google search on FPA's Research and Practice Institute, they have all kind of great white papers that they produce probably 3 or 4 times a year. They're all free. You can really go into a deep dive and read into them. But there were 4 qualities a financial advisor should have. And this goes back to those key instincts that we're doing without realizing it. But when I saw this, I was like, the light bulb went off and said, there it is. Somebody finally put to paper, what is the important thing that's making your content stand out from everybody else's? And the first thing is exactly what I told you. You have to have some level of expertise. The clients must perceive you as the expert. And I'm going to talk a little bit more how you do become the expert from the practice that comes from creating content. But you do have to be the expert.
And so here's the easy way to do that. If you want to do a blog about taxes, go become an EA, be a CPA. If you want to talk about investing, go be a CFA. Find the credentials, find the things, the marks that are out there that make you the expert in that field. And then you have to find a mechanism by which you can communicate that expertise. Hey, I belong on this platform because I've done this, and this is what I have to say.
And the other thing, the skill is a guide. This is a key one that I want you guys to recognize, is that nobody likes people to talk down to them. And just because, and I think there's a fine line between being the expert and the person that's just pushing content down. You have to finesse it in there a little bit in the fact that you want to be likable and feel like the guy. I think where we've had a lot of success is that we seem like the guys that come into your house every 2 weeks and we drink a beer with you and talk about personal finance. I mean, because we don't slap you in the face with a lot of terminology. I think our clients and our listeners will tell us they think we're smart, but they don't think that we are so brainy that they can't have a conversation with us. Because that's the thing. You have to have a skill as a guide. And remember, a guide is different than a boss, a bully, or somebody who's a superior. A guide is somebody you hire for Yellowstone that's going to take you and show you all the sites and that you actually get excited about spending your hard-earned money on. You've got to have that skill to kind of ease into things with clients or listeners or content consumers.
And it's not just our industry that's shifting from salesmen to consultants. That's happening everywhere, right? So the day of the salesman, I don't want to say it's past, but this is what we've recognized. It's the folks who can do both very well, the folks who can be a consultant but can also do the thing that salesmen did effectively in terms of communicating and explaining your ideas. Those are the people who are going to be able to really set themselves apart.
And then deep understanding. I mean, this is the thing that we're going to talk about on a future slide. that you have to, this is where the connection starts to be formed, because I'll tell you, most people who become what I call fans, and that, the fans that's who's going to become your clients, are people who tell you, I've been listening for a year, been listening for 2 years, 3 years, even 10 years for us. They have to feel a connection with you, and that connection, it's harder digitally. I will tell you, it's much easier when you sit across the table from somebody. You can give them the active, listening feedback. That's a true understanding connection. It's a little harder with digital, but it can happen, but it just takes time, and that's why you just have to persevere through some of those hard times.
And traditionally, it was done through quantity of touches, but we live in this world where, if you're an advisor, right, and you have 100 clients, and your goal is you want to see every client twice a year, you're talking about 200 times you're having to see folks in a year, and if you only have 280 working days in a year, you can see how it starts to get compressed. Or if you just want to start a blog, right, or you want to somehow connect. What's really interesting in the world in which we live now is that technology has a solution that you're able to multiply your time in a much different way than we ever were able to before.
And then the last one, this is a key one, is vulnerability. I think it ties into the whole deep understanding. These things all feed off of each other, because the deep understanding is that you're also providing content that they're looking for. You know them well enough that the next show you're doing is going to be something that has them nodding in head. It's not much different than when you're in church and you feel like the preacher's talking directly to you. That's the deep understanding. But the vulnerability is when you actually are, the depth of a relationship from the sharing gets to a point that they feel like they actually know you. That's what's crazy, is that our listeners, our fans, and our content consumers will tell us they feel like they really do know us just from listening to the show for a number of years. Yes? That's on my very next slide. So let me get through one more slide, because I want to show you a few more things, because I think that's what my next slide. Do you want to go ahead and?
Well, I was just going to say that what's interesting is you have to figure out how to balance 1 and 4, right? You really have to figure out, how do you be an expert but not a know-it-all,
Yep.
right? How can you be someone who has the answers but not look at me, I have all the answers? And that's where that vulnerability comes in so well. And I think what helps us as advisors is we don't have to have all the answers right there. We don't have to be able to solve every problem immediately. If you try to do that, whether you're a blogger, podcaster, financial advisor, or a doodad salesman, you're really kind of setting yourself up for failure.
So here's the key payoff, is how do you communicate this? I always call this the digital bridge. It's the same things. You'll notice expert, skills guide, deep understanding, and vulnerability, but I went a little further with this because I want to go through the stages that you're going to feel as you create content. Is first, you have to establish yourself as an expert. The only way you can do that is, here's the hard part of this. You're going to feel like you are creating content and sending it out into the great void and nobody's listening to it, because you get no feedback for a while. It's like no different than when you start a company. It takes usually 3 years for a company to kind of get its ground and take off running. So it's not going to be unrealistic that you'll do this for 3, 4, 5 months. And you go, is anybody even listening to this stuff? I mean, that's the thing, is you have to be consistent. And I got to tell you, the quality of the content is the biggest stress that I have, because I feel like at all times this could go away from me. Because there is a lot more people, the noise is out there. Even though financial advisors haven't figured this out, there's a lot of people that want to talk to you about personal finance out there, podcasting or blogging, and you just worry if your quality is not good enough or you'll lose them. So to be an expert, you really do have to be consistent. Keep it up. Don't give up on that part of it. Skill is a guide. Why do they give you more continuing ed when you teach a class versus when you just sit in the seats and listen? Is because obviously the more you do it, the better you become at the skill of being a guide and creating content. It is feeding upon becoming an expert the more you're doing something over and over again. So you do have to create content. It makes you a better person. The deep understanding, look, there's a reason, y'all have heard it before, you get 2 ears, 1 mouth, because you're supposed to be better at listening, and that's what's going to create that deep connection with clients. But what we have found, there is no replacement for that listening. However, so many times clients have come to us and said, hey, I listened to that podcast. These are clients, not just content consumers. These are people who have now become clients, and they're listening to the stuff. They'll say, I heard you do that podcast on health savings accounts. It was great, but I have a question about this. And then we'll go to an annual update meeting or have a virtual annual update meeting. We'll ask them, was the distance that big of a deal? And they'll be like, no, I listen to your show every 2 weeks, so I feel like you're coming in and talking to me every 2 weeks. Those are counting as touches. Even though we're not sending emails, we're not calling these people, they are counting that as a touch, which is a help on building that relationship. Your answer to your question on vulnerability. I don't mean to do it, but if you listen to the podcast, we let you into our lives. I mean, one of my favorite things about that I've done with Bo is he got married in 2012, and we did a podcast on what he thought things were going to cost. You know, like what's the agreed upon amount of money before you and your spouse have to go get permission from each other. And I think his number was like 25, 40 bucks.
It was 40 bucks.
I was like, dude, she's not going to be able to buy
threshold.
shampoo without, checking permission. I said, that is a ridiculous number. So we did this before he got married, and then 12 months goes by, and we ask him, hey, how did it go that first year? Let's go back through those exact same questions. It was hilarious because he blew it on all counts. I mean, and he has a great marriage, but I knew, and me being married, I'm in my 18th year of marriage now, I knew that he was blowing it, but it was very entertaining. I've shared some personal stuff. I have a special needs daughter who's autistic. I've talked about ABLE accounts and other things that you can do from a planning perspective with special needs. All that stuff connects. And you don't mean to do it, but I think that this is a window into you. I mean, it is so interesting that the more you're willing to share, and I'm not saying, because look, I don't even do Facebook personally. I'm not the type of person that is, taking selfies everywhere and then saying, look at me. I just think it's a natural thing that comes from you just creating content and sharing how life hits you. Because that's what we even had at breakfast, somebody said, how do you come up with ideas? Life happens, guys. I mean, I can pretty much, something every week happens that I feel like I want to share or talk about. So there's usually content out there.
The biggest thing that sets us as advisors apart from robo-advisors is that we're not robots, right? And we shouldn't be scared of that or nervous about that. We should embrace that. I mean, that is the lifeblood of who we are and how we create that deep understanding and how we communicate that vulnerability. I think we should own that and use it as a tool more than be frightened of it.
So this one cracks me up every time I see that picture. I want to control expectations because it's one of those things where every time I go to, especially it's bad when I at this Fidelity conference or other things, they always talk about the need that you need to be doing social media. And when I see that stuff, it so reminds me of when I turned 16. And I put that picture up there. Does anybody know what type of car that is? It's a Chevy. Do y'all know what type of car it is, a model? It's a Cavalier. That was my first car. My car looked exactly like that. And here's what I think is cool about that car is that you see that red stripe that's on this shoddy little thing? That means it has the F41 suspension. That was an upgrade. That means it was the sportier version of the Cavalier. It even had some, on the dashboard, it had F41 written across there. And as a 16-year-old, and it was not a new car, by the way. This car was 8 years old, I think, when I got it. And I thought the ladies were going to just dig me now that I had this car. So I tell you that the reason we put the title, Facebook is not going to make you rich, is because I think that a lot of people think there's this magic pill, that if I go out there and I do a LinkedIn profile, if I do a Twitter feed, if I go do Facebook, oh my goodness, these clients are just going to start rolling in. This is what I need to be doing because I saw an article in Financial Planning or Investment Advisor that said social media is what we need to be doing. That's not the way it works. It really is. This is a slow dredge in the beginning, and then it starts paying off. You'll start getting some emails and stuff. But have reasonable expectations. Know that this thing really is just a megaphone for your message. If your message is not good, it's not going to do you any good. You really do need to be a thought leader and make sure your message is good. And that's why we want to give you that funnel of those four things, the expert, the deep understanding, the skill as a guide, and the vulnerability. Run it through that filter, and you will hopefully create that quality content that does start to connect, because just being there and showing up ain't going to make it happen for you.
And the good news is, and this is some interesting research, right? So we found when we first started, our very first client came to us somewhere between 2008 and 2009 from the podcast. And we help our clients with everything, right? And so one of the questions we always ask our clients at the end of the year is, hey, we'd love to send your tax information to your accountant. Who's your accountant? What, can we send it over to them? And I remember the first few times we had this conversation, and we're all on the phone, right? And the client was like, they were nervous about it, right? Because they didn't want their accountant, who's right down the street, to know that they met their financial advisor through the internet.
They were embarrassed. They really were. There was an apprehension or embarrassment that they had met their financial advisor on the internet. And that's why I don't want y'all to think this bridge was something we were smart enough to just figure. It was because of practice.
That's exactly right. We didn't see this, but it makes so much sense now. The same thing used to happen in online dating, right? People were very nervous to let you know that they met their spouse through eHarmony or whatever the dating site is. Well, now, if you're someone who lives in that world, it's almost the norm not to be involved in connecting with your life partner or whoever else via social media. So it's become more of a norm than the outside idea. So if you can find your spouse by that means, why in the world wouldn't you be able to find service providers? So the good news is that the entire world is changing, and it's moving into our favor, which is something to be very, very excited.
Can y'all see what that stat says? Sometimes I don't know if in the back you can see. What this is showing is in 2005, the people who found it acceptable to find your spouse online was less than 50%. It was only 44%. But you fast forward 10 years, and you look at now 59%. And then we've got a breakout over here on the right side that shows the age group of people who are using social media and other ways to meet significant others. You can see it is blown up. And I'm telling you, we think there's a direct correlation to that acceptance of online dating to finding your professionals virtually. I mean, geography doesn't mean what it used to mean, guys. So that's why we're hitting a renaissance period, and you guys are kind of right here at the gold rush with your picks and axes, and we're hopefully going to turn this into something.
So the question becomes, how do you implement, right? So as you're sitting there, you're thinking, okay, what's my voice? Okay, I've got that figured out. How do I communicate it? That's this digital bridge coming up with a way. Well, how do you implement the strategy? And what we think is really interesting is that there is no one right answer. So these three just crazy-looking guys. The first one is Cornelius Vanderbilt. And if you guys have never seen the special on him, what's really interesting is he had made a fortune, a huge fortune in the shipping industry. And he said, you know what? I recognize the future isn't in shipping. The future is going to be in railways. And so he came up with this idea that he was going to completely sell everything that he had in the shipping world and direct it into railways. So one way that he implemented the strategy of really finding his voice was a kind of starting over. If you're going from being a financial advisor to being a blogger or going in some different type of direction, sometimes it's necessary to do that. Louis C.K., the comedian in the middle, one thing that he did really interesting is every single year he starts over from scratch, throws away all his old material and starts fresh because he wants to stay relevant, he wants to stay new. And then what's really interesting about us, and this is Brian's very first picture he ever took when he started the Money Guy show. When you first listen to the show, if you go back to 2006 and listen to the first episode, it sounds like this guy is doing it. So it's very fitting, right? Well, as we had some success, as our listenership grew, as we got some notoriety out there nationally, this was no longer appropriate, right? So we had to make sure that our voice was constantly reflecting who we are and where we were in our life cycle. The way that we were able to do that was effectively putting together a team together, and FinCon is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, I want to caution you guys. One of the things I thought as we started getting some traction and having success is I thought, you know what, now that I've reached this level of success, I'm just going to start outsourcing certain things. Like I'm going to outsource the redesign of the website. I'm going to outsource this branding consultant who's going to do this part. I'm going to outsource the person that does all the social media side of it. There's this thing where you say, well, I'm just going to basically eat bonbons, and every now and then I'll write a blog post or a podcast. It doesn't work. And I will tell you one of the wake-up calls for me, because we decided, like I said, we're going to become much more deliberate with how we ran the podcast since it was generating so much business for us. So you can see there's the main things I had told you: the expertise, the skills of God, deep understanding, vulnerability. Those are the things you already know. You need to have your vision of what you want the future to look like. Already know your voice. But I found as we hired the branding consultants and everything else is that they did a great job of honing my voice, and it made me do a bunch of worksheets and spreadsheets and other things trying to fine-tune what I really did feel like I was an expert at. And they also helped Bo, because I'm sometimes loud, and he's not quiet, but made sure his voice was heard and articulated the vision. But as we were in the implementation phase, our content manager at the time kind of called us up after one of our powwows that we had on a conference call and said, this thing is starting to get away from you guys. It doesn't even sound like you anymore. This is not your voice whatsoever. And it woke me up. It kind of slapped me in the face. And what I've realized is that these things are great. You can go hire people once you start getting traction and you get a little jingle in the bank. But the secret sauce is actually right in the middle, because if you're not keeping your eye on the ball with what your actual vision and message is, it very well could, I don't want to say it ends up as boilerplate, but it starts looking more like the branding company or the content manager stuff more than your stuff. So I hate to break it to you, you can't completely walk away from the whole part. Nobody's going to know you or care about you and your stuff as much as you do, because this is your baby. and what you have going. So I say still outsource, but make sure you're keeping your voice. And that's the word of caution, is that you don't want to lose your voice as you're getting into that harder stuff as you're implementing the other parts. So make sure everything truly does reflect you on the theme, the visuals, the language, and then you are the only expert for yourself. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll let you.
Yeah, and so the thing that we'd ask you to remember as you walk away is that there are things that set you apart. And it's the expertise, the skill as a guide, the deep understanding, the vulnerability. How you communicate those things matter. That's what allows your voice to be heard. And then taking the right steps to implement will be the difference in success and failure, right? Understand what you're good at, understand what you're not good at, understand how to fill in the pieces. But remember that while you can outsource some of it, you can't outsource all of it. And if you want to hear just some horrific horror stories, we'll be happy to hang around and tell you afterwards of some huge mistakes that we made. That's how we learned all this stuff, was we did it really, really wrong, learned from it, and we were able to bounce back.
Yeah, and that's the last thing I'll close it out with, because I know we've got another group that's coming in after us. We'll take a few quick questions, but figure out what your voice is. I mean, that's the thing. I do think you should jump, because we were talking to a gentleman at breakfast this morning, and he wanted to make everything perfect. If you go back to 2006, you'll see my stuff was far from perfect. It's actually entertaining to go back in the time capsule and see how this show sounded in 2006. But you do need to fine-tune what your voice is, and I think what really pounded it home for us, and we didn't realize how lucky we were, the idea to give it away, to be an educator, to have the heart of the educator, really our intentions powered this thing and the passion powered it in the beginning. If our voice wouldn't have been so pure, I don't know that it would have worked. So make sure you have an understanding of what the vision, what your expertise should be, and I think you'll have the better opportunity of everything connecting. So that's kind of that part of it. Did we have any questions? Yes, sir.